Cleveland didn't just witness a win. What unfolded tonight felt like the spark of a full-blown quarterback uprising. For months, this franchise has been drowning in doubt, tension, and whispered arguments behind closed doors. But the moment Shedeur Sanders stepped onto that field, everything shifted. Fans in the stands felt it. Veterans on the sideline sensed it. And people inside the organization knew instantly that something far bigger than a single game was unfolding. The Browns weren't supposed to look this alive. They weren't supposed to look this confident. And Shedeur sure wasn't supposed to outshine the guy the coaching staff has protected all season. Yet that's exactly what happened. With every snap, every read, and every perfectly timed strike, it became clear that the narrative Cleveland has been force-feeding its fan base since training camp is starting to collapse in real time. What made tonight different wasn't just the stats, it was the energy. The stadium didn't react like this for veterans. It didn't shake like this for highly paid starters. It erupted for a rookie the front office tried to slow play, a fifth-round pick analysts laughed at, and the quarterback fans have been begging to see since draft night. And the craziest part? This wasn't just a performance. According to people close to the team, this might be the moment that forces the Browns to make a decision they've been trying to avoid all season. One that could either unite the franchise or tear it apart. Because after tonight, one thing is obvious. Cleveland just found something it hasn't had in decades: hope. Before the stadium shook, before the chants, before the Browns realized their entire quarterback hierarchy was about to flip upside down, Shedeur Sanders walked into that locker room with a level of calm that almost felt unreal. No nerves, no panic, just quiet confidence. Something you don't expect from a rookie thrown into one of the NFL's most chaotic situations. And the craziest part? He didn't hide where that calm came from. He said it straight. Preparation, studying, and trusting that he wasn't stepping onto that field alone. For a guy who didn't get summer reps, didn't get the early season support, and didn't get the benefit of an offense built around him, Shedeur walked in like someone who already understood the weight of the moment and still welcomed it. But the calm wasn't coming from the organization around him. Far from it. Behind the scenes, Cleveland was a pressure cooker. A fan base on edge, veterans frustrated with inconsistency, and a coaching staff desperately clinging to a quarterback plan that hadn't worked the way they hoped. Rumors had already begun swirling weeks earlier, whispers that certain players were losing confidence, that fans inside the building were pushing for change, and that ownership was starting to question whether the franchise was ignoring the obvious answer sitting right on their bench. Yet none of that noise seemed to touch Shedeur. Even standing in front of reporters, he spoke like someone who understood the bigger picture. That life doesn't always give you the perfect situation, but the moment still demands execution. No excuses. No, I didn't get enough reps. Just a belief that when the opportunity comes, you deliver. And that's what stunned people. Because while Cleveland braced itself for another offensive collapse, Shedeur stepped into that moment like it had been carved out for him from the start. The calm wasn't a coincidence. It was the warning sign. A signal that something was building. Something neither the coaches, the analysts, nor the doubters were ready for. And as soon as he took the field, that calm turned into something else entirely. Something the entire stadium felt instantly. Long before Shedeur fired that first deep shot, Cleveland's fan base had already made their choice. This wasn't some sudden wave of hype that appeared after one highlight. This was a slow-building eruption that had been growing since draft night. When the Browns traded up to take Shedeur, the reaction wasn't confusion or hesitation. It was excitement. It was hope. And it was a sense that maybe, finally, Cleveland had found someone who didn't just fill a roster spot, but carried the presence of a future franchise quarterback. But inside the organization, the vibe was completely different. Reports claim that some within the coaching staff weren't sold on him. Analysts dismissed him as a fifth-round project. And every time fans begged for him to start, The front office tried to tone down the expectations. They wanted patience. They wanted time. They wanted a slow, controlled rollout of a quarterback the city was already ready to hand the keys to. Fans didn't care. Week after week, their frustration boiled. Every stalled drive, every missed play read. Every game where the offense looked flat or predictable. The chants for Shedeur got louder. At home games, you could hear them ripple through the stadium whenever the offense struggled. Small at first, then growing, then impossible to ignore. Online, it was even more intense. Edits, compilations, polls, and comments flooded every Browns thread. Rumors started flying that even people inside the building were surprised by how quickly Cleveland had attached itself to Sanders. And that pressure didn't stop at the fans. The players felt it, the media felt it, ownership definitely felt it. But the coaching staff, they tried to stand firm. They insisted the timing wasn't right. They backed Gabriel publicly, defended him privately, and tried to convince everyone, maybe even themselves, that sticking with the original plan was the smart play. But the reality was unavoidable. The city had already picked its quarterback. The momentum was already shifting, and every snap Sanders didn't get only made the anticipation grow stronger. So when he finally stepped onto that field, it wasn't just another player entering a game. It was the moment the entire fan base had been waiting for. And what happened next proved they were ready for something much bigger. The moment Shedeur finally got his chance, the entire tone of the game flipped in an instant. Cleveland fans had spent years watching quarterbacks hesitate, check down, and play scared. So when Sanders lined up for his first real shot at pushing the ball downfield, the air inside the stadium tightened. People stood up without even realizing it, waiting to see whether the kid they'd been chanting for was actually ready for the moment they had practically manifested into existence. Then it happened, the throw that cracked the entire night open. It wasn't a safe, scripted pass. It wasn't a conservative just don't mess up attempt. It was a full-blown attack. Sanders read the coverage like a veteran who'd been studying the Raiders' tendencies for years. He noticed the safety shading late, recognized the leverage, and didn't hesitate for even half a heartbeat. He stepped into the pocket and launched a deep shot that traveled more than 40 yards through the air with the kind of confidence Cleveland hasn't seen from a quarterback in ages. The ball didn't wobble. It didn't drift. It dropped perfectly into his receiver's hands as if the route had been drawn directly on a chalkboard. And the second that catch was made, the stadium didn't just react. It detonated. Crowds erupted so loudly that people near field level later described the moment as a shockwave. Teammates on the sidelines stared at each other, many reportedly mouthing the same thing. "This kid is him." That throw wasn't just a highlight. It was a message, a signal that the Browns' offense didn't. We don't have to be slow, predictable, or overly cautious. It showed Cleveland something it had been missing for years, a quarterback who wasn't afraid to take control. And even though that moment set the tone, nobody realized it was only a preview of what was coming. Because the throw that truly defined the night, the one that would change the franchise narrative entirely, was still waiting in the fourth quarter. And nobody in that stadium was ready for what came next. By the time the fourth quarter rolled around, the energy inside the stadium had shifted again. But this time, it wasn't excitement. It was fear. Cleveland fans know the feeling too well. They've lived through collapse after collapse, heartbreak after heartbreak. And as the Raiders started creeping back into the game, that familiar dread settled over the crowd. The offense had lost rhythm, the defense was wearing down, and the noise in the stadium turned it from electric to uneasy. You could feel thousands of people bracing for the same old story. But Sanders didn't flinch. Deep in Browns territory, facing a brutal 3rd and long, everything looked designed to fail. The Raiders sent pressure, bodies flying at him from every angle. Most rookies panic there. Most veterans panic there. But Shedeur stayed calm, drifted up in the pocket, and kept his eyes locked downfield, like the chaos around him didn't exist. Then came the moment. With the game hanging by a thread, he unleashed a throw that instantly became the defining highlight of the night. A 67-yard missile that ripped through the tension and turned the stadium into absolute chaos. It wasn't just accurate. It wasn't just perfectly timed. It was fearless. The ball cut through the air and landed in stride. And in that split second, everything inside the stadium changed. Coaches on the sideline were seen screaming. Teammates took off sprinting toward the end zone. Fans were shaking the upper deck so violently that security reportedly had to check the structure. This wasn't normal hype. This was a franchise-altering, narrative-shattering, we've been waiting 20 years for that throw kind of moment. It was the type of play that instantly separates a placeholder from a playmaker. The kind of throw that gets replayed endlessly in bars, group chats, and every Browns fan's mind for years. And the best part? That throw didn't just seal the game. It exposed a truth the organization had been trying to ignore all season. Because once a rookie makes that play under that pressure, you can't go back to pretending he's just another backup. And that's when things inside the locker room really started to crack open. What happened on the field was dramatic, but what happened after the win was even more revealing. The moment Shedeur walked into the locker room, several veterans approached him immediately, not with the polite, casual encouragement players give rookies, but with something far heavier. According to people close to the team, they told him straight up, "You're the guy. This is your team now." That wasn't hype. That wasn't emotion. That was a declaration. It signaled a shift inside the building that no coach, no front office member, and no depth chart plan could ignore. And the reactions didn't stop there. An anonymous offensive lineman reportedly told a local reporter that they blocked harder for him tonight than they had all season. Now, that's not the kind of comment players make lightly. That's the kind of statement that exposes a team's internal temperature, one that's been quietly rising for weeks. Another player allegedly said the offense simply feels different with Shedeur running it. More confident, more explosive, more dangerous. Of course, these comments spread fast. Not officially, not through press conferences, but through whispers, texts, and quiet conversations that begin to leak their way into the media. And those whispers added fuel to an already growing belief. Sanders didn't just win a game. He earned something far more valuable. He earned the room. This is where the tension becomes impossible to hide. Because when veterans, leaders, captains, respected voices start choosing sides, the entire structure of a team shifts. Suddenly, it's not just fans calling for a change. It's not just analysts pointing out the obvious. It's the players themselves sending a message to the staff. We know who gives us the best chance to win. And that type of endorsement carries weight. It affects practices. It affects the mood. It affects trust. Because once a locker room decides who its quarterback is, there's no going back. And for Cleveland, that message was loud, clear, and impossible to ignore. But outside the locker room, the reaction was even louder. If the locker room was buzzing, the internet was on fire. The moment the final whistle blew, social media erupted in a way Cleveland hasn't seen in years. Clips of Shedeur's throws flooded timelines within minutes. Slow-mos, breakdowns, fan reactions, even local broadcasters replaying the 67-yard dagger like it was a Marvel scene. Every major sports page had some variation of the same message. Cleveland only looks alive when Shedeur Sanders is on the field. But this wasn't just highlight hype. Online discussions started digging into something deeper, patterns, numbers, and trends that fans had been tracking for weeks. Posts pointed out how different the offense looked with Sanders running it. Faster tempo, more confidence, more vertical threats, fewer stalled drives. Meanwhile, comparisons with Gabriel began circulating everywhere. And while no one was outright attacking the veteran, fans couldn't ignore the difference. Many pointed out how predictable the offense became when Gabriel started, how defenses loaded the box, and how the playbook shrank. Rumors began floating too. Nothing confirmed, but enough to stir debate. Some fans claimed insiders had hinted for weeks that Sanders looked sharper in limited reps. Others suggested the coaching staff had been forcing a narrative that didn't match what players were seeing. And while none of that is verified, the sheer volume of speculation showed how quickly the fan base was shifting its loyalty. Hashtags started trending. Edits of Shedeur's throws were everywhere. Even neutral fans from other teams began commenting about how Cleveland might have stumbled onto something special. The narrative wasn't controlled by the organization anymore. It belonged to the fans, the media, and anyone with a clip of that fourth-quarter bomb. But the real pressure came from the one place the Browns couldn't ignore: their own supporters. Season ticket holders, longtime fans, and even casual viewers all echoed the same sentiment. Cleveland finally had a spark, and they weren't willing to let it get buried under veteran preference again. And as the online firestorm grew, it created a storm the coaching staff couldn't outrun, because the internet wasn't just celebrating, it was demanding answers. And those questions all pointed in the same direction. Why isn't Shedeur Sanders QB1 already? Inside the building, the aftermath of Shedeur's breakout didn't bring clarity. It brought conflict. Because while the entire city seemed ready to crown Sanders as the new franchise quarterback, Kevin Stefanski wasn't celebrating. In fact, reports claim he still believes Dillon Gabriel gives the Browns the best chance to win, a phrase coaches use when they're doubling down on a decision they don't want to revisit. To some in the organization, Stefanski's loyalty looks less like strategy and more like stubbornness, an attachment to a plan he crafted months ago and refuses to abandon, even as reality shifts right in front of him. But ownership sees things differently. They're watching the numbers: attendance spikes, merchandise jumps, national engagement, and the overwhelming reaction online. Every metric that matters to a franchise's growth points in one direction. Fans want Shedeur, players respond to Shedeur, and the entire league is suddenly talking about Cleveland again. Rumors suggest ownership has quietly asked why the coaching staff was reluctant to give the rookie first-team reps earlier in the season. Again, nothing confirmed, but enough whispers have surfaced to hint at tension behind closed doors. And this tension isn't new, it's been brewing. People around the team have noted how Stefanski resisted letting the quarterback competition play out naturally, choosing instead to push a predetermined script. Gabriel was his safe option. Experienced, predictable, controlled. Sanders, on the other hand, represented volatility. Upside, yes, but also pressure, attention, expectations, the kind of spotlight Stefanski has avoided ever since arriving in Cleveland. But after the Raiders game, that spotlight can't be ignored. Not by the fans, not by the players, and definitely not by the people writing the checks. If Stefanski insists on going back to Gabriel, he risks alienating the locker room. He risks losing the fan base, and he risks placing his job on the line. Because this isn't just a football debate anymore, it's a power struggle. A veteran coach defending his system versus an entire city demanding the quarterback who just changed everything. And the decision Stefanski makes next might define his future in Cleveland. If Kevin Stefanski decides to bench Shedeur Sanders after a performance like this, the consequences won't just be uncomfortable, they'll be explosive. This isn't a simple QB debate anymore. It's a franchise-defining moment, and every path forward comes with fallout the Browns can't afford to ignore. Inside the locker room, the shift has already happened. Players don't openly challenge coaching decisions, but they do communicate through energy and effort, and everyone saw how the offense responded to Sanders. If Stefanski turns back to Gabriel, the message players hear is simple. Performance doesn't matter, momentum doesn't matter, and the voices inside the room aren't valued. That kind of decision can fracture trust instantly. It can create quiet tension between position groups, divide leadership, and make players question whether the staff is putting ego ahead of winning. The fanbase reaction would be even more intense. Cleveland has endured 2 decades of quarterback heartbreak. They've lived through the busts, the injuries, the endless resets. So when they finally see a spark, something real, something undeniable, they cling to it with everything they have. Benching Sanders now wouldn't just frustrate fans. It would feel like betrayal. Stadium energy would collapse. Online backlash would dominate every Browns conversation. Season ticket holders would start demanding answers, and the narrative around the team would spiral. And for Stefanski himself, the risk is massive. Coaches survive losing seasons. Coaches survive injuries. But coaches rarely survive choosing the wrong quarterback when the right one is sitting on their bench. Ownership wants excitement. They want the fan base engaged. They want hope. If Stefanski ignores all of that to protect his original plan, the organization may decide they need someone new to. And if the Browns try to bury that momentum, the backlash won't just be loud. It could reshape the entire direction of the franchise. Cleveland has seen talented players come and go. They've seen flashes, short-lived hype, and quarterbacks who looked promising one week and disappeared the next. But what happened tonight didn't feel like another temporary spark. It felt like a shift, a moment the entire city will point back to and say, that's where everything changed. Not because Shedeur Sanders was perfect, but because he brought something this franchise hasn't felt in a long time. Belief. For years, the Browns have been stuck in a loop of rebuilding, rebranding, and restarting. Every new quarterback was supposed to be the answer, only for the cycle to reset again. But Shedeur's performance broke that pattern. It wasn't just the deep throws or the timing or the fearlessness under pressure. It was the way he carried the team, the way the locker room gravitated toward him, and the way the city erupted the moment he touched the field. That's rare. That's different. That's the kind of moment franchises wait decades for. But now Cleveland stands at a crossroads. The fan base is all in. The players have made their voices heard. The momentum is undeniable. Yet the decision still rests with one man, a head coach who must choose between sticking to his old plan or embracing the future that unfolded right in front of him. And that's where the tension becomes unavoidable. Because the longer the Browns try to pretend nothing changed tonight, the louder the pressure will grow. What comes next could determine more than just this season. It could define the direction of the franchise for years. Will Cleveland ride the momentum of a quarterback who just delivered their biggest spark in years? Or will they fall back into the same cautious patterns that have held them back? One night doesn't guarantee greatness. It doesn't crown a legend, but it does reveal something powerful, something the Browns haven't had since the Kozar era: hope. And if the team is brave enough to embrace it, this might not just be the turning point of a season. It could be the moment the Browns finally break their cycle and start building the future fans have been waiting for.